So with inheritance, we can reuse code and achieve polymorphic behavior. That's great. But as I always say, too much of a good thing can be a bad thing. So don't create deep inheritance hierarchies. This is a common mistake amongst people who start out with object-oriented programming. They abuse inheritance and create deep, complex, and fragile hierarchies that easily break. Then they go and publish a blog post and bitch about object-oriented programming. It's like saying cars are bad because someone had an accident. No, cars are great, but if we don't use them the right way, they can even kill us. So let me walk you through a real example. Let's imagine we're going to build an application where people can sign up as students or instructors. So an amateur developer might think, okay, here we need two classes like student and instructor. Now, let's say both these classes share some common attributes. So they argue that we should extract the common code into a class called user. Now, let's say we have two types of instructors, regular and premium. Now, because a regular instructor is an instructor, they argue that here we need inheritance because inheritance is an is-a relationship. So whenever we say something is a kind of something, then we need inheritance. Now, to make this more complicated, on the other side, we need a class called course. Now, a course can have attributes like ID, name, and so on. We might need the same attributes in the user class. So again, an amateur developer might extract the common code and put it into a class called entity. This is an example of deep and complex inheritance hierarchy. And it's not the worst example. Trust me, I've seen way worse examples. Now, what is the problem here? The problem is that whenever we use inheritance between two classes, we're creating dependency or coupling between them. So in this example, the user and course classes are dependent or coupled to the entity class. And that means anytime we make a change in the entity class, we might have to change the user and course classes as well as all the classes that inherit from the user class. For example, if we add a new parameter to the constructor of the entity, you know that we have to modify the constructor of the user and course classes. We have to add a new parameter and take some value and pass it to the base class. Now, even if we don't have to make any changes in the derived classes, at least these classes, as well as all the files that are dependent on them, have to be recompiled. This is the problem with inheritance. Now, the higher in the hierarchy we make a change, the cost of the change is going to be higher. So don't go for deep inheritance hierarchies. Limit the inheritance to a maximum of 3 levels. Anything more than that, it's going to get complicated and it's probably going to bite you later on. So what can we do here? Let me show you an alternative solution. Let's say both the student and instructor classes need an attribute called last login. Instead of adding this attribute in the user class, we can duplicate it in both these classes and drop the user class. Yes, there is a bit of duplication here, but now these two classes are not dependent on a class like user. They're independent of each other, so they can change and evolve independently without impacting other classes. Now, there's even a better solution here. We don't necessarily need different classes for instructor and student. So we can bring back the user class and drop the instructor and student classes. Here in the user class, we can have an attribute called type, which can be an enum. In this enum, we can have members like instructor, student, and so on. By the same token, we don't necessarily need to inherit the user and course classes from entity. So just because a user is an entity doesn't mean we need inheritance here. So whenever you're trying to add inheritance between two classes, think about alternative solutions.